Good morning and good afternoon, depending where you are. And welcome all of you. Thanks for showing up with this book talk and showing your strong online solidarity. My name is Chunrong Liu. I'm Managing Director of Fudan-European Center for China Studies here at NIAS at the University of Copenhagen. The director of NIAS, Professor Duncan Macago, was in another meeting. He asked me to extend greetings to all of you. Well, today's webinar will be about social hierarchy. As we know, hierarchy is so pervasive, even in the Nordic societies, where we honor short social and political distance. We cannot avoid some form of hierarchy. And arguably, there are some good and bad ones. So we are so happy to rethink hierarchy together with the two wonderful political theorists, the author of this new book, Just Hierarchy, just came out at Princeton University Press, and together with my colleague, a political scientist, also my good friend, Professor Fudan-European. So yeah, Daniel may need not much introduction, as many of you have known him so well. But I do want to emphasize that he is a political theorist like no other, and he has been living in East Asia societies for decades, through which he really grew and developed many competing and compelling moral arguments, including the normative defense for meritocracy, as you all know. And he is a professor at Tsinghua University and Dean of School of Politics and Public Administration at Shandong University. So he is working in the hometown of Confucius. His latest book with Dr. Wang Pei really set up a very debatable agenda in our time. And Wang Pei is a scholar in the field of political philosophy and history of thought, and now a researcher, my colleague at Fudan University at the China Institute. I recall your wonderful lecture at our summer school last year on Confucianism and the gender, which I think is a part of this ethical reasoning. So I really look forward to some updates of your thoughts. So both of them speak fluent French, Chinese, English. Are you speaking, what kind of language are you picking today? I hope English, okay. Okay, and they will speak for 10 to 15 minutes about their book, main points. And then my colleague Zheng Xu will join and share his remarks. Zheng Xu is, as I said, he is a professor at the Fudan University, a deputy head of Department of Political Science there. He graduated from the University of Michigan. Prior to his position at Fudan, he was acting director at the China Policy Program Institute at University of Nottingham. So he works intensively on democratic values of Chinese citizens, institutional changes and political reforms, and China's relation to the world. So, so like Daniel and Pei, he also published vigorously works in many international journals. So with that, I really look forward to a brainstorm with all of you, and let me give the floor to our two authors, and Daniel and Pei. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Where is the slide?
One second, please.
1 second.
Yeah.
This one.
Okay.
Okay. We
prepared some slides which we will use.
Oh yeah. Oh.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, here we go.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
And you can see the PPT?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so thank you. If you were in China, we would call you Liu Laoshi or Professor Liu, because here we respect social hierarchies. But in Nordic countries, I guess we would call you Chunrong. So thank you so much for the kind introduction. And what really motivates our book is, I guess it's partly cultural difference, just the fact that social hierarchies are often taken for granted. For example, in countries like China or in provinces like Shandong, where we have a lot of Confucian heritage. And our book opens with a discussion of how the seating arrangements are at formal meals in Shandong province, and which are kind of hierarchical, but they're designed to provide a sense of community so that everybody derives a sense of joy and satisfaction from the arrangement. So it's a kind of just hierarchy, we argue. But basically in English, as you know, the term hierarchy sounds so pejorative, and it's as though nobody wants to discuss it. But we can't avoid discussing it because all large-scale modern societies need to have some forms of hierarchy. So it's very important to distinguish between the good ones and the bad ones so that we could promote the bad ones and minimize the influence of the good ones. Let's be clear about that. And our book, we're supposed to be modest in kind of Confucian influenced cultures, but it's the first one that explores systematically this idea of what it would be for society to have morally justified hierarchies. And it's influenced by Chinese philosophy and culture, but not exclusively. And we do try to pitch our arguments at a high level of generality. For example, we have a chapter on the hierarchy between humans and animals, which is meant to be universally applicable. Now, intuitively, when we think of hierarchy in English, and also even in Chinese, the term dengji is quite pejorative. We immediately think of the bad ones. We think of hierarchies where those who have power, unjustified forms of power, like because of their race or their sex or their caste, oppress those who have less power. Of course, we reject those forms of hierarchy. We don't want to defend the unjust forms of hierarchy. But it's also important to think about what are the morally desirable forms. And here again is where the question that we ask is relatively new and which we try to explore in this book. So there's a long tradition of thinking about hierarchy in China, but arguably much of it comes from Confucius himself, arguably the most influential thinker in China's, well, at least 3,000 years of written history. Maybe you want to say something about his progressive conservative outlook?
Yes, we endorse this progressive conservative perspective, and we think we can trace it back to Confucius, because for Confucius, we all know that he was so attached to the ancient rituals, ancient virtues, but also he was very famous as a social critic. So we endorse this methodology as well. We think we have this progressive conservative outlook as well. The progressive means like we just deny those, we will reject those so-called unjust hierarchies based on just the sex, race, caste, or something. But we want to endorse this zeitgeist, this new this new spirit of time. And also for conservative, it means like conservative means a conservative conserves more, and we want to conserve the tradition of each culture. The conservative doesn't mean like we only want to conserve this traditional Chinese essence, but no, we pay respect to every culture, and we want to it is our own duty to conserve our own culture, and also it's our duty to pay respect to other cultures. We like at least you have to pay respect, then get to know that, understand that, not judge in the first place. So we think we have this methodology from learn this methodology from Confucius.
Yeah, it sounds strange in English, progressive, conservative, because it sounds like an oxymoron. But it's not necessarily so. I mean, on the one hand, I think, especially in China, it's common that we are attached to tradition and we favor progressive values. And the question is how those work together. So one example of that, and in the opening chapter 1, we argue that we look to Confucianism for this idea that perhaps hierarchies based on age can be morally justified.
The family.
In the family. Now, it sounds strange on the face of it as from a Western perspective, because once you're kind of 18 years old, we're all adults, we're all supposed to have similar sense of rationality. But think about it. I mean, if everybody has this reasonable level of rationality and compassion, and they constantly try to improve themselves, which is a kind of Confucian imperative, then the more experience they have, the more books they read, the more roles they experience, the better they should become from a moral point of view. And there's lots of support in social science, not just from China, but from the West as well, that people generally, of course, there's many exceptions, grow wiser with age. So on this grounds, there's a kind of reason for age-based hierarchies to be justified. But what really makes them justified is that they shift. They're not, we dislike, to be frank, we hate hierarchies that are ossified. And I say, because you're a man, you have permanent power over women. Because you're a certain race, you have permanent power over other races. We hate those. But we respect hierarchies that shift over time. The young people become old, and eventually they will have the same authority that the elderly had, so long as they maintain a commitment to self-improvement and have a reasonable compassion and rationality. And of course, don't use violence and so on to support what they want. So again, we strongly reject the ossified, permanent forms of hierarchy, like the dominance of men over women, or certain race over others, or the kind of stereotypical view of the caste system in India, where if you're born to certain castes, you have power over others. Totally wrong from a moral point of view. Here we're strongly progressive. Now, again, we go back to Confucius because he changed the definition of what it means to be a junzi, or sometimes it's translated as a kind of gentleman or nobleman. But he said, no, a junzi is not like a Western-style aristocrat who owes their power because of their bloodlines or their family background. They have authority because they have above average ability and especially virtue. And ever since then, arguably the next 2,500 years in China has been a discussion about how to select and promote junzi so that they can serve the public. And so, for example, again, in China, the ideal of political meritocracy, 贤能政治, is taken for granted. It's a mainstream part of political culture. And much of the political system is supposed to select and promote leaders with superior ability and virtue. Throughout much of Chinese history, there's been debates over how to do that.
Yeah, ever since Han Dynasty, we have this recommendation system to recommend capable and virtuous people to court to have position. But after that, when the right of recommendation got ossified, they changed it into like a 9 ranking system, and the 9 ranking system got decayed so easily, and they finally in Sui and the Tang Dynasty it changed into imperial exam system. But for the imperial exam system, there are still some debates on that, because in Song Dynasty there are some Confucius like Zhu Xi, Chen Hao, Chen Yi. They would think, well, imperial exam system could select those people who have capacities, but how about virtue? How about this this intention to serve people? So they suggest that they could have like the court could have some special quota for those people who are very noble and virtuous. So the debates on political meritocracy has been like a process for a long time in ancient China. But how to realize this? How to help the court to select and promote the proper people at the proper position? It has been a long debate on that.
It's a constant argument, and sometimes the hierarchies become ossified, in which case they need to change. So,
so here's a question.
Yeah, here's a question for the people who are watching this.
For the audience, what is the opposite of a hierarchy? I think many of you would think it's liberty or equality, but for Confucianism, we don't think so. We think that would be a completely chaos, a disaster.
The opposite of hierarchy is chaos. Yuan. It's not equality. You can't do away, anytime you try to do away with social hierarchy, look what happens. French Revolution, Cultural Revolution, what do you have? You don't have equality, you have chaos. The question is, how do we promote the good forms of hierarchy and minimize the bad forms? That's the hugely important question. And it matters too for international relations. And in chapter 3 of our book, we have a discussion of hierarchies between states. There's always going to be hierarchy between strong states and weak states. How could they be morally justified? And we look at the philosophy of the great Confucian thinker Xunzi, who argued that, well, look, hierarchies between states are always going to be there, but they could be justified if there's common rituals between states that provide a sense of community among states, so that the strong states and the weak states engage in practices that are win-win for both states. For example, the strong states provide favorable economic cooperation or security arrangements that benefit the weaker states. We argue that's a form of hierarchy in international relations that is morally justified, that can and should be reestablished in the modern world. Let's not pretend that states are all equal. It's a total fiction. Let's take for granted that there's hierarchy in international relations and try to make it work so that it benefits both the stronger and the weaker states. Oh, we've already spoken too long, so probably we're going to end here. And if you want to discuss the implications for COVID-19, we'll be more than happy to do so. Just one tiny thing. We also have in chapter 4.
We have this hierarchy in between human beings and animals.
Yeah. So we argue that we have an obligation not to be cruel to animals, and also when it comes to pets, we have special obligation to care for the pets. In chapter 5, we argue that we have an obligation to, well, there's a hierarchy between humans and machines, and we need to maintain that hierarchy so that machines serve humans. So let's move on to, let's hear Professor Wang Zhangshu's comment.
Okay, great. Thanks for this very beautiful justifications on this phenomena of social hierarchy and what is meaningful and responsible hierarchy, right? And I like your idea that hierarchy is a open and it's also a dynamic order and a progressive change, right? So so let's hear a political scientist's perspective. I mean, we can discuss hierarchy from different disciplines, and sociologists would have a lot to say, you know. But Zhenshu, where are you? You seem to be in some basement, huh? Okay, but I'm sure you can offer some down-to-earth points to us. Okay, you have around 10 minutes to go.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Chun Yong. Thank you, Daniel and Pei, for this book and for giving me this opportunity to discuss the book. I have just finished reading the whole book, and yesterday, literally just yesterday, I finished writing a very short review of this book. I have shared that book review to some of my students, and it will be published by a Chinese Journal of Political Studies very soon. So because I have written this review, I feel I don't have much more else to say. And I didn't prepare a PowerPoint or whatever. I just have a few random points, and then I'm eager to go into a exchange mode, not a presentation mode. And I have seen in the audience that some people are already, this Davy Stoksky, he's saying he wants the authors to talk more about COVID-19 in hierarchy, which I was going to ask as well. So let me just make a few points. I think this is very important to me. I told Chunyong that I am converting to a Confucian political scientist, in the sense I'm converting to Confucian political theory, because actually I have been in this profession, this field for now, well, almost 20 years now from my PhD time. I have always been, well, I entered the field studying liberal democracy, studying democratization, but I am always intellectually not settled. I didn't have a very clear commitment or normative commitment to a kind of ideal type of political system. The liberal democracy model was attractive, but very soon I realized it was more an man-made phenomenon that we have a liberal democracy hegemony in the world, in the intellectual world, especially when I returned to China, the academic community, political scientists feel are very liberal. I think they are naively taking the liberal democracy as the divine, divine type of political design. So I have been troubled. I always wanted to transcend this democracy versus authoritarianism, this divide, and want to find a way to reduce this divide, to remove this divide between democracy, between so-called Western style democracy and kind of Chinese or Eastern Asian way of thinking about politics. So I read Daniel's meritocracy book earlier, several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was a very important attempt to bring this kind of Chinese or Confucian way of politics into the field, into people's mental world. But I have to say, to take meritocracy as the alternative to liberal democracy is insufficient, because I think meritocracy only is more specific. It's more about how a government system identify officials, train them, place them in different positions, and then they move them up in the system. So it was less. It was more a governing machine making ideology or method. It was less holistic political philosophy. So I am very happy now that you have moved above this and writing about hierarchy as a more general concept or mental tool to think about politics, to think about political system. Of course, you have 3 other chapters that are about other kind of hierarchies. So I think we are in a project to more working much harder to theorize the Chinese way or Confucian way of political imagination, political design, that will really can become a viable alternative to the liberal democracy ideology or the doctrine. So that will be my overall emphasize on how important this book is, how important this intellectual path is, and you know, meritocracy or political meritocracy in Daniel's terminology, I call it. I will expand it to be Minben, yeah, people-based meritocracy as a broader concept. To you know, it's broader than just meritocracy, but of course it's within this hierarchical thinking of political design as a more overarching term to understand domestic political design. And you have a chapter talking about the international community in the Xunzi way of thinking of international community with order, with ordering of countries with different status, countries with different ranking status. That will be in the international community making area. So in these two, I think we have a group of people. I will say Daniel Bell, I will say Joseph Chan, and I will say Bai Tongdong. By the way, I think Bai Tongdong's recent book will be a very good complement or match with your political meritocracy book. These two books can, if put together, will actually be a comprehensive theory of Confucian political ideology. And then let me quickly say, I would like you to talk about the COVID-19 and hierarchy, and I should also recommend to the readers about your chapter on human-animal relation and your chapter on human-machine relation. The chapters, you have a part in the book. There is a part about the relation between the intimate people, and then the relation between the two genders, two sexes. The authors, they bring in some Indian texts. Those are very interesting. That was very new to me. So let me just talk about one last point. Then I'll stop. It's really regarding the relation between human beings and animals. I fully support your thesis, and it's just regarding the meat eating. The meat eating part. I think you also make a very compelling thesis. But I have a little debate regarding because you say the meat eating is necessary, or is the reason is that people will find the meat delicious. That people because people will find eating meat delicious, so we should recognize people's right to eat meat. I think there is a more scientific reason, a stronger argument, is that biologically, I think human cells, we need animal protein. I think they are scientific evidence that will justify human beings as a kind of biological race, that we need animal protein. And let me say, of course, you write a lot about the human, people, and pets relation, and I see your lovely cats there. And your story about Didi in Hong Kong was very, very touching. But I have to be very cruel here, because I grew up in Guangxi. You know, I grew up eating many kind of meat. I'm not going to say I eat cats, but I do eat dog meat. Okay, and in my hometown there are so many dog meat restaurants. So again, the point here is we don't eat pets, but there are animals. There are dog animals that are raised for meat consumption, and I think I really think your point that in the future it is the stem cell technology that will grow meat for human consumption. That will solve our moral dilemma of eating meat. And I support your argument that in terms of the animals that are harmful to people, to human beings, such as insects and virus, we should have no mercy. Okay, I will stop here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Zhenshu, for adding great values to this discussion and to position the ideas in some theoretical context. And I think the part when you talk about food, it's very controversial and very interesting, and it's delicious to some of us maybe. And the discussion about AI, you know, social challenges associated with AI, can social hierarchy be a good solution to that? And that's also very interesting. And I think we in the next half hour, we are expecting questions and comments from audience. So please feel free to raise your questions and remarks to all the panelists. But before we do that, I have a very quick question. I hate to let it go because Zhenshu, to three of you, Zhenshu suggests that modern democracy is a man-made phenomenon, a man-made order. So are you suggesting that hierarchy by nature is a kind of a spontaneous order, namely a kind of political institution or arrangement that is organically or naturally formed? So I'd like to hear a bit more thought on that. And so the nature of hierarchy as a kind of a social order. Yeah. So do you have some quick comment on that? Otherwise, we can pick up questions. I will try my best to communicate all these questions to you.
Maybe Zhenshu wants to respond to that point, since he made it about man-made versus democracy versus natural hierarchy. Is that what?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Oh, I didn't realize you were asking me. Yeah, I really think in this beliefs in liberal democracy. One, belief in liberal democracy as the best form of government, and second, that liberal democracy is determined by holding multi-party elections, one person, one vote. I think these two doctrines are humanly made. That I have my theory about how to understand, how to analyze a political system, or how human society can make morally suitable, morally good political order. But I don't have time to talk about that today. What I'm saying is now I find in the traditional Confucian theories about politics very important sources that can help us to develop an alternative political framework about what is good politics, what should power be for, and how should power be exercised. I think the Confucian tradition gave us a tremendous amount of resources to construct a new theory, and that's why I compliment Daniel Bell and this Bell and Wan book, and other colleagues, Joseph Chen and Bai Tongdong, and David Kahn. I should mention he wrote about the international relation of East Asia in the old time.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe we say just quickly respond, or not respond, but compliment, Butong in the point about animals and humans. I guess the main principle that we argue in chapter 4 is that if there's really a choice to be made between animal life and human life, of course, we will choose human life. But that doesn't mean that we can do anything we want with animals. And we have a strong principle that we should refrain from cruelty, which applies even to the worst kinds of harmful insects like cockroaches. Yeah, like there's an example.
There is a person from Philippines that he put this cockroach on electric chair to torture it. That's a kind of performance art.
Yeah.
But we are strongly against that.
Yeah. And regarding, but we do think that within the range of animals that there's different principles that should inform the way that we treat them depending on our relation to us. So in the case of pets, like cute cats, you know, we have an obligation not just to refrain from cruelty, but also to care for them.
And we regard them as a part of our family.
Yeah,
almost
like a part of the family. I'm not going to comment on on the justification. I mean, the one, to the extent that we do have a reason to eat meat, I don't quite agree actually, Zhongshu, that it's because there's protein in meat. I mean, that could easily be replaced by other things. People lead perfectly healthy lives without eating meat. I'm not one of them, I confess. I still eat meat. I try to minimize it and I feel guilty about it. And the reason I ought to feel guilty about it is because if animals are brought up under cruel conditions for human consumption, then we should feel guilty about it. If they're brought up under non-cruel conditions and they lead decent lives, and then maybe we kill them at the end in a non-cruel way, you know, maybe then we can eat without feeling too guilty. I actually learned a lot from Bai Tongdong's, or we both actually, from Bai Tongdong's book on which you mentioned, which he has also a very good discussion along similar lines. Now, why should we eat meat? I mean, again, one reason is that it's very delicious, and sometimes it's part of a culture and a community, right? I mean, I'm Canadian, but Americans love to eat turkey at Thanksgiving. If it were to be replaced by broccoli, it would seem strange, right? Maybe from the community in which you're from, I don't want to, you know, but maybe if dog eating really is a central part of the culture, then there might be a case, assuming the dogs are brought up under non-cruel conditions. But why don't we, the first question was about COVID-19, and maybe let's go to the PPT. We could just say a little bit about COVID-19 before moving on to other issues.
Yeah, here.
Okay.
Here.
So, you know, we're in China now, and to be frank, we feel quite fortunate because there were bad mistakes made in the beginning. It was a slow response from local officials in Wuhan, and there was a sudden attempt to, you know, not make things too public, and arguably, of course, that was a big mistake. But once the central government came on board and basically used very strong measures, especially in Hubei province and to a certain extent in the rest of China, the thing was controlled within a few weeks, you know, and now we're in mainland China and basically life is back to normal. What's not normal is a possibility of international travel because the rest of the world, including where I'm from, Canada, including my hometown, Montreal, is in terrible shape. And to be frank, sometimes I kind of wish that Confucian values had been more influential in the rest of the world for this reason, because it would have done better at dealing with the pandemic. What exactly how does Confucianism, or let's say, how do Confucian hierarchies play a role here? Well, again, this tradition of political meritocracy, that you have competent governments led by public officials with the ability and motivation to serve the people, and they gain the trust of the people. That's central to the Confucian political ethic, and arguably that's what happened here once the central government came on board and decided to deal with this pandemic. And ordinary citizens in East Asian countries influenced by Confucianism respect authorities. It's not just China, it's, you know, South Korea and Vietnam, and other places, in a way that might not be true in countries that lack a Confucian tradition. Of course, we also have this tradition of respect for Drinzi, for conscientious professionals. Once they speak, we listen to them. There's not this kind of anti-elitist tradition which you have in countries like the United States.
In Chinese, we call it the 尊师重教. Pay respect to your masters, to your teachers, to your professors, and to experts. So like when Dr. Zhong Nanshan, he warned the people that this disease could transmit human by human, and every Chinese would like started to prepare to confront with the virus. But before that, some people do not take it very seriously, but ever since Dr. Zhong Nanshan was warning people, everyone was prepared, people would listen to that.
It's hard to imagine this respect for Drinzi in other large countries. You know, we should compare China with huge countries like US or India or something. I mean, that's the right comparison. Not with, we love Denmark, but Denmark we can compare with the richest parts of Shanghai maybe. You know, like Francis Fukuyama in his book says Denmark is the ideal society. Maybe it is, but it's tiny compared to China. We can't really compare the two, right? Now you have many other concerns, many other Confucian factors. Again, the fact that this value of filial piety, reverence for elderly people. You know, one thing about Sweden, and we don't want to criticize other countries, but there's a kind of view that we're going to allow elderly people to die for the sake of developing a kind of herd immunity that would protect most people. I mean, that view would just be crazy in China because of the strong emphasis on filial piety. Of course, you have other Confucian practices like, you know, there are hierarchical practices of greeting or bowing in South Korea and Japan, to a certain extent in China as well. Of course, it reduces the risk of contagion compared to Western-style, more egalitarian practices like shaking hands, not to mention kissing and hugging like in Italy or France or something. So anyway, let's just end here and move on to other issues.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And this is a very nice discussion about how the Confucius values can help combat COVID-19, and also I think they have also advocated kind of strong collective responsibility in the society. So that had really also helped. There are many factors, as you saw. And the part of discussion about food, I think, again, shows that this book deserves a wider reading by those foodie and food lovers. So they should really look into your insights about this. And let's pick up some questions from the audience. I do have some very good ones. There's one, as you can also see, may I read it?
Yeah.
Talking about, are just hierarchies just because or despite of their hierarchical elements? In my opinion, hierarchies are more likely to be regarded as just when they are the least hierarchical, meaning that the differential privileges they confer are constrained as much as possible. So they do not spill over into other spheres, in turn translating into unjust hierarchies. What is really defended is the division of labor that is entailed by hierarchies. What promotes efficient organization of society, not the uneven privilege and rewards that hierarchies confer. So yeah, it sounds very sociological, question. So the hierarchy as a kind of distribution of incentives and the rights and yeah. So what is your quick comment?
No, it's a great question. Has a few points. Our main argument in the book is that different social relations have different morally justified hierarchies. So there's no one principle that could be applied to all of them. In a way, that's why it's more difficult to understand this idea of just hierarchies, because the unjust hierarchies all have the same character. Those with power oppress those with less power. And you can, whether it's based on race or sex or caste, they're all the same. But just hierarchies, it really depends on the social relations when you think about what justifies them. So in the case of relations between intimate or family members, the main justification is that they're shifting. It doesn't really depend so much on whether they confer different privileges. Of course, they also need to be constrained to a certain extent. Like we mentioned that the hierarchy based on age, it assumes that those who are elder only have authority if they have reasonable amount of rationality and compassion. For example, they don't use violence. You know, the very early, very crude, let's say the vulgar versions of filial piety say that the elderly can do whatever they want to the younger, can hit them. You know, obviously we disagree with that. So there has to be constraints in place. Commitment to self-improvement is important. If you give up self-improving, this is totally unfilled, but I'm not going to criticize my mother, but I must confess, you know, the past like 15 years, she's remained stable, which is good in a way, but it means that she hasn't improved in any way. So she kind of, you know, loses a little bit of the moral authority in this way. But different social hierarchies have different characters. So the hierarchy between rulers and citizens, yes, they're justified if the rulers serve citizens, but they also need to be constrained in different ways. The rulers should not have the power to arbitrarily do whatever they want to citizens. They have to be constrained in different ways. The relation between humans and animals too. Humans need to be constrained, but it's not exactly the same character as the other hierarchies. So that's why for each social sphere, we argue that there's different moral principles. And I really like one part about this question where it says that what kind of justifies a hierarchy in one sphere shouldn't spill over into other spheres. And that's a good way of thinking about it too. Think about different social spheres have different hierarchies, and the boundaries between those different social spheres should be maintained. That's a good way of thinking about it. Do you want to add something?
Okay.
Yeah. When we're talking about hierarchy, it's not just the idea of a hierarchy or some hierarchy in an abstract way. We're talking about some concrete hierarchies in different like social circumstances and in different culture backgrounds. So what we are like arguing here, something like this shifting hierarchy in a family or age-based hierarchy in a family, probably not. It could not be endorsed into other culture backgrounds. But we like all those arguments are rooted in Chinese background in the first place, and probably in modern Chinese background as well. Because in ancient times, age-based hierarchy, probably we do not need to argue that. They take it as a kind of a natural law or something, but it is not. And we have some other conditions on that. And as long as I said, like those parents should have been reasonable at least and have this self-improvement desire. But also what we're arguing for this hierarchies in international spheres, like hierarchies in between big country and small countries. It doesn't mean like only the big country have the say, but also the small country could have the their interpretation of this hierarchy. Although they're like small countries and it seems like they do not have big territories, but they still have this right to redefine, reinterpret the hierarchy in between them. And why do we want to have this difference in between like big country and small country? Because big countries has to have this more responsibility because the position is in accordance with responsibility. So if the big country shrink in some way in the future and small country rise up, so the hierarchical relation could be shifting, and we are by definition rejecting every kind of hierarchy like ossified. We want hierarchy could be shifting with this flexibility, and we want the subject on the proper position could be in accordance with their responsibility and duty.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I jump
Great.
in a bit here?
Yeah,
Yes.
brief.
Yes, I think the question include one part is saying that the best hierarchy is the least hierarchical. Is that I actually don't think that's might necessarily be the case.
Yeah.
I think the authors are quite clear that hierarchies in different spheres will be very different. So hierarchies between parents and children will be very different from hierarchies between different political ranks, like in a political system. And I also like very much, and it will be difficult to defend. It will be hard to argue that the opposite of hierarchy is not equality, it's actually chaos. That means everywhere, in every sphere, there are some kind of hierarchy. There's some kind of ordering, ranking among different players or different units. It's just we want to reduce the unnecessary hierarchy, but we want to maintain the hierarchies that can produce more, like larger size of public goods.
Yeah. Great. I think the discussions about hierarchy and in international sphere sounds like a great dialogue with the mainstream IR theories. You know, for instance, realism. So I think it's very interesting to think about, you know, how social theories of social hierarchy can revisit those theoretical arguments. And let me read two more questions, and then three of you can respond together, maybe. And I think we are running into the last few minutes. So one question is about, well, it's very simple, but I think you have provided a partial answer to that. Who decides what is just and what is not just? Often it will be those who are at the top of hierarchy, and how do we prevent the decision from being corrupted? So the other question is about, having finished the China model a few days ago, finished reading, I'm curious about the dynamics between electoral democracy and social hierarchy. If age, experiences, and virtue seem to go together, would a electoral democracy then perhaps benefit from raising the minimum age from when the people can vote? Would more suitable leaders be elected if the voting group was more mature, experienced, higher in social hierarchy?
Okay.
I think it sounds very interesting. So, so three of you can ponder on that and give some quick comments, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first question, who decides what is just and what is not just? Again, it depends on the social relation. If it's a hierarchy between humans and animals, I mean, I would love for our cat to participate in the discussion, but you know, he unfortunately lacks language ability. So we have to decide on his behalf and just try to persuade other humans that this is the proper form of treating animals. But when it comes to a hierarchy between rulers and citizens, citizens have to show to a certain extent that they trust and endorse their rulers. There's different ways of doing that, but there has to be some, if it's just the ruler saying this is the hierarchy and you guys take it or leave it, and the citizens don't accept it, obviously that's not a morally justified form of hierarchy. So again, it depends on the model, on the social relation. So of course, the last chapter on humans and machines, again, machines, unless IR develops a capacity for creativity and intelligence, now at the point that all they can do is follow our orders and rules and algorithms. But until that day, then we have to decide what's a proper hierarchy between humans and machines. That's a very interesting question about electoral democracy and social hierarchy. Actually, I hadn't thought of it. And if there is a general tendency, of course, many exceptions, that people become wiser with age, and maybe there is a case for increasing the age of voting. And as you know, the tendency now in almost all Western countries is decreasing rather than increasing, which seems to be going the other way. I mean, now it's like from 21 to 18, now 16, who knows what's next, 14, and who knows what's next, 12, 10. I mean, it seems crazy, right? So maybe there is a case for, again, it has to be grounded in good social science, you know, but if there's evidence that, for example, people when they're 25 or 30, you know, have more wisdom, more experience, more capacity to make informed judgments.
Or after they're working for like at least for 5 years.
Yeah, or after they're working, or after they have a family where they might have developed this capacity for caring for others. Maybe there is a case. On the other hand, you know, as you know, there's also a tendency for very old people to lose their capacity for their cognitive ability or physical ability, and they become very, they lack capacity for self-improvement and or even for any kind of rational discussion. Of course, then there would be a need to limit the voting for those sorts of forms of elderly people. But I think it's a good question. It opens up this interesting discussion of, you know, at what is the age where we can have the greatest tendency for people to vote in an informed way. It's a great question when it's totally politically incorrect. I mean, if I were to go back to Canada and participate in elections and I'd say, you 18-year-olds should not have the right to vote, guess how many votes I would get? You know, probably 0, even from people over 18. So anyway, yeah. But from an intellectual point of view, it's a great question.
Let me talk about just a little bit about the other aspect of this age in politics is actually China. The constitution requires someone to be above 40 years old in order to serve as the president of the country, where we don't have similar age limit for being a political leader in other countries. So in Australia, you can have a very young prime minister. And then China, this is about the other end of aging, that when you get very old, you probably will lose the capacity to be a leader, right? Then China, in general, and this I think Daniel, and you write this quite well in your chapter 2, I believe, about retirement arrangement in the Chinese polity. But what we have now is in the United States, because age discrimination because of age is very bad. So you cannot restrict Donald Trump for being too old to serve. You cannot legalize old people from participating in politics. That's the other part of we don't have a right hierarchy there. We should set a hierarchy against very old people. That being too old, you cannot assume certain responsibilities.
As a Canadian living and working in China, it's very hard for me to say anything good about the US political system, but let's just note that there is a constitutional age limit for American presidents. I think it's 35 or 40 or something. So in other words, the very young people in the US can't be presidents.
Okay, is there any other questions? I think
I have a student from Myanmar. He says that in Myanmar they have age limit for every level of political leaders, from parliament members to presidents. So it's probably from their culture that they respect seniority. Yeah. So just put this in.
Yeah, that's a very interesting footnote. Well, time is running. I'm sure we all gain a deeper understanding and inspirations from
There's still a couple of questions. Should we try to very quickly?
Yeah, sure. Maybe we can have 5 more minutes to go on. I hope all of us can stay tuned. Okay. It's one from David. Power corrupts is a statement in political science. How is this solved? What check power abuse? Can ruler for life be justified? So, and think about this. And another one is, Daniel, you mentioned that hierarchies between countries are an inevitability. I would like to ask, how does a understanding of a just hierarchy in international relations reconcile, for example, the military violence that has been historically employed to impose a and maintain previous and current global hierarchies. What could Confucianism, presumably nonviolence, so nonviolent international order looks like? Yeah.
So the Confucian tradition actually is not in favor of pacifism, which means absolute commitment to nonviolence. I mean, including Meng Tzu Mencius, he justifies what we call today just war. I mean, if a country is being attacked by a very oppressive power, then they have the moral right to defend themselves, including using violence. So what we're doing in this book, though, is providing a kind of standard for judging when hierarchy in international relations is justified and when it's not. Of course, in the real world, there's tons of immoral stuff happening, right? But the question is, what standard should we use for assessing whether it's morally justified or not? And we're arguing that just because there's a hierarchical relation in international relations, that's not a reason to criticize it. If the hierarchical relation is win-win and benefits the weaker power, and both sides agree, then we argue that it's morally justified. If the powerful country oppresses and abuses the weaker country, and the weaker country obviously is against it, then we can criticize it. So again, we're defending an ideal which is partly expressed in the reality, but that allows us to think about when power is justified in international relations and when it's not. About power corrupts, again, it depends on what social relation we're talking about, right? I mean, in the case of the relation between humans and animals, again, little animals, I mean, one way of giving them a say maybe is in the political process, putting some humans in charge of defending their interests, like maybe in the Zhengxie, the CPPCC, yeah. Right? I mean, it's possible to imagine that there would be one or two representatives who would have the obligation to defend the interests of animals in debates. I mean, that would be interesting. Or in the Canadian Senate, maybe there should be one or two representatives who have the specific task of defending the interests of animals. So it depends on the social relation. That might be one way of doing it with animals. Yeah, in the case of humans, obviously there has to be some checks on power, and different countries would implement checks in different ways. I mean, Americans tend to think there's only one way of checking the power of rulers. In China, since the era of reform, we've had different ways, including collective leadership, which is still there to a certain extent, and an age limit, which is there to a lesser extent now, at least at the top. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for the great conversations and great questions, beautiful arguments. Before we close this seminar, this webinar, I would like to share good news. If you want to read and buy this book, and the Princeton University Press will offer a special discount. Daniel, right?
Yeah. 30% discount, but you have to input the discount code, right? Which I think has been distributed to people, or.
And that's equal to all, right? There's no hierarchical.
Yeah, no hierarchy.
Okay, which is great and generous. So you can check our website to find it. And I personally also very appreciate your thought about that. There should be a pluralistic view on the principle of just hierarchy. And I read a book about Viking society. I also find some very interesting form of hierarchy, which make the society very competitive and very, very functional. And I mean, how they organize society in the small hierarchies. Okay, maybe I can ask a last minute question. So what would be your next book, Daniel?
Well, why don't you answer first?
You answer your next.
What kind of moral argument you are going to formulate in a post-coronavirus political context?
I've been living in China for many, many years and trying to learn Chinese culture and the language. And to me, it's a fascinating question of how could one become Chinese. So I think I'm going to write a book, something with the title Becoming Chinese. I'm not sure I've succeeded, but it's an ongoing project. But I think your book sounds even more interesting.
I got a writing project on a book, a political history of calligraphy in ancient China. And I want to, because nowadays Chinese people, not just Chinese people, people would think like calligraphy is just art for art, but it was not like that in the history, and probably it is not like this in modern China. So I want to, I'm planning to write a book on this. The title could be the power of writing, a political history of calligraphy in ancient China.
Sounds great, and I think that also sounds to me speak to the ideas you have developed before. So look forward to that, and I think we should bring you and your books, new books, to Copenhagen next time, offline. I mean, so thank you to all the speakers, to all of you, and also Zheng Xu, of course, and to all these wonderful questions and great conversations. Yeah, I think we are coming to the end, and hope to see you. Yeah, stay safe and stay calm. Yeah, do you have some words to say, Daniel?
Well, thanks to both of you. I don't know, maybe why don't you both of you say what you're writing on? We'd like to hear as well.
Yes.
You are talking about.
Oh, I don't have a book project at the moment, but I do have recently secure a fund to study this traditional Chinese political thinking and how they mean for today's world. So we will probably do something together. And I also want to say that your last chapter on the relation between human and the machines, you are leading that to the discussion of Marxist idea of communism. So I was saying you should develop that into a new book.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, that's a great comment. Okay, thank you all, and yeah.
What about your book, Professor Liu, on the Nordic culture?
Well, I have a lifelong book on Nordic, my observation of Nordic model and Nordic puzzles. And so, as I talk to you, sorry, I haven't really make a lot of progress on that. But I'm reading a lot about this very special, exceptional society, and I look forward to further inspirations from your ideas. Yes. I also see some great, nice words from the audience to say thank you. So it's a wonderful discussion. Thank you again.